A very warm welcome to everyone present here. Ribandar Talks is honored to host Captain Raghu Raman, founding CEO of NatGrid, former CEO of Mahindra Special Services, ex-president of Reliance Industries, distinguished fellow ORF and author. During the course of his illustrious career spanning more than 30 years, Captain Raman has deployed different styles of leadership ranging from authoritarian in the armed forces, incentive-driven in the corporates, to procedure-driven bureaucratic style prevalent in the government. He has been a strategic advisor to both national as well as global level leaders. His unique career profile has enabled him to learn, practice, and teach first principles of organizational dynamics, strategy, transformations, and the mindset shift that is needed to lead in a complex and ever changing world. Today, Captain Raman will be enlightening us on the ability to focus without distractions on cognitively demanding tasks through his talk on deep work, focus as a force multiplier. I request the audience to post their questions in the chat, which will be taken up during the Q&A segment. Now, without taking much of your time, handing it over to you, sir.
All right, thanks, Tan. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, sir, for this very kind words and the opportunity to speak with all your students. I can see several of them are here, almost 450 students are here, so that's great. What I'm hoping to do is to share with you some of the work that I've been doing in the last few months, ever since this lockdown. And even before that, I've always been fascinated by the subject of how the process of learning and training, especially younger leaders, is undergoing a massive change. And very clearly from a world of 20, 30 years ago, when it was enough to be a master in one discipline. You were either an engineer or a doctor or a chartered accountant or a technician, and that profession would pretty much the depth of learning in that profession would be more or less what is required to see you through life. But increasingly, we are seeing that a large majority of our leaders and ourselves are going to be working in the knowledge space and as a knowledge worker. And a knowledge worker, some of these rules change dramatically, and you will be hopefully, I'll take you through a journey to realize how one of the most important, what I call, or rather what people call a killer app for the world of the future, the ability to do deep work, and how this is much more than just a fad or something that you'd like to do, or, very cursorily say, oh, don't multitask, focus on one task at a time. But it's much, much deeper than that. It's much more structurally deeper and stronger than that. And if you master this capability, this skill, I think this is the only one skill you'll require for the rest of your lives. If you can master this skill, I can assure you that all the other skills will become much, much easier for you to learn. And you will always have a differentiator in this fairly competitive world, which has just become a little more competitive in the last few. So I'm just going to put on a presentation. Just give me a minute, which I want to share with you, which will help me go through this stories one by one. And okay, right. Let's see. Yeah. So I'm assuming you can see a screen right now. Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thanks a ton. So basically, what I'm going to talk about are 4-5 different aspects. One is, of course, what is deep work and why is it so relevant, especially in the current context? What is shallow work and why? What are its implications of doing shallow work, which is what, unfortunately, many times most of us end up doing for most of our time. And a very fundamental question to ask, that if it is making so much of sense to do deep work, then why are our institutions, our organizations, our business environments, and even our personal lifestyles so contrary to it? So why are our lifestyles completely opposite of that? And finally, how do we rewire ourselves, rewire our brains, literally rewire our brains to start doing more of deep work, which is what is a major differentiator. So let me take you through this through these stories of These gentlemen and a woman that you see over here, I'm sure you'll be able to recognize most of them. The one on the extreme left is Carl Jung, who was arguably one of the greatest psychiatrists and thinkers in terms of medical health. In 1922, very close to his hometown, he built a tower. He called it it's a place called Bollingen, and he built this tower over there called the Bollingen Tower. And he built that tower basically to seclude himself from all distractions and all disturbances, because he believed that the human mind is like a pond of cluttered, bucket of cluttered water, which is all muddy. And you have to let the water sort of settle for the clarity to emerge. And to be able to do that, you need to actually create an environment where there are no distractions. There is nothing that is pulling your mind away, because the human mind, genetically, by the way, which has evolved over millions of years, is evolved to respond to stimuli of distractions. An animal, if you ever see an animal, look at our closest cousin, the primates. The primate is not always gazing in one spot. It's constantly looking up, down, moving around. It's looking at every stimuli. If there is a noise, it turns on. That's the primal state of our brain. So our primal state of the brain is wired to constantly be distracted by the environmental stimuli, which worked very, very well for millions of years, because that's what kept us alive. If we heard a twig which was breaking, it could warn us about a tiger which has come. Or if we saw some swaying branch, we could see some fruits. So there was a danger and opportunity radar which was constantly at work. And that method of the mind is completely contrary to what is being demanded of most knowledge workers in barely the last 50 years, in the last 50 or 60 years. Because until I would say about 100, 120 years ago, maybe even 200 years ago, most human beings on this planet were not knowledge workers. They learned a skill. It was farming, blacksmith, goldsmith, bricklayer, carpenter, shepherd. Learned it by internship, learned it by interning with their parents, or by going as a understudy to some expert and learning it from them. But in the knowledge work, we have to take the distilled knowledge of other thinkers, other strategists, other teachers, other frameworks through medium such as books, absorb it, and then get the fundamental foundational knowledge of the basics. First, we learn alphabets, then we learn syntax, then we learn language, then we learn sciences on top of it. And on the layer of each and every foundation, we come up with a layer of the brain where knowledge can be processed. Now, to be able to do deep work, Carl Jung believed that you needed to seclude yourself away from all the distractions which your intrinsic brain is programmed to respond to. He was not the only one. There are several examples of great producers of work. The second gentleman you see over here is Mark Twain, who did a very similar, physically cutting off from even his house. He used to live in an outhouse where he used to work in a very strict schedule. Woody Allen, who is the third person on this plaque, is arguably one of the most productive Hollywood producers, directors, writers. In his 44 years of career, he's produced 44 films. And 23 of them have been, more than half, have been nominated for the Academy Awards. So you can imagine what kind of prolific producer he is. Interestingly, in all his 44 years, he has never used a computer to type a single sheet. He always uses an electronic typewriter, and he shuns. Bill Gates, the founder of one of the largest billions of dollars empire and a technology empire, very religiously takes off time. He calls them think weeks, where he moves away from everything that he does for a couple of weeks. And it's in one of these thought vacations, if you want to call it, or workations that you want to call, is when he discovered the importance of the Netscape navigator. And that's where the internet browser, the operating system. J.K. Rowling, when she was writing her final book in 2009, up to then, she did not ever come in social media. Even when she finally appeared in social media, her first Twitter was, yes, this is the real me, but I'm not going to be very present over here in Twitter because I'm focusing on writing my book. And the last person, you may not recognize him, his name is Neil Stephenson. Ironically, he is a writer about future technologies. He's known as a cyberpunk. He writes about how technology is going to change the world, science fiction and all of that, and he doesn't have an email ID. He cannot be reached, virtually cannot be reached. And there are many, many, many such examples. Now, during the process of studying deep work, I consulted with several books and several articles and several sort of experiments that were published, and I'll be quoting many of them as I go along. Towards the end of this presentation, I'll also give you all the names of those books and those publications so that you can do your own research. But this is how the book by Carl Newport, which focuses on deep work, begins. It begins by providing ample proof that if you have to do some meaningful work, then you have to understand this formula. And by the way, you don't need the reminders of all of these people. Even if you take it back to your own example, that when you have been preparing for something really, really important, the formula that you have implemented and found very useful, if you have been able to implement, is that to produce a high quality of work, you need two things. You need time and you need intensity of focus. Time alone will not solve the problem. Intensity of focus alone will not solve the problem, but the combination of two will use, and that's why you will see in my experience as well, I've seen it during my years as a student, that very often in a class, the ones that who really top the class, who do really well in the class, they don't necessarily study as much as the layer right next to them. It's very good possibility that the students who come from, say, the 10th downward to the 20th in terms of actual man hours, they may be putting more hours than the students who come in the first 5, but maybe the first 5 have figured out a way to get such a laser sharp focus that the time that they're spending might be less, but very much like the people we saw in the previous slide, they have found a way of optimizing that time to a very high degree and create what is called deep work. Now, for us to be able to understand what is deep work, I want to sort of put some metrics over here so that you kind of can put your head around it. Now, it's a very good possibility that some of you might have been working, or some of you may have worked before starting your MBA, or maybe many of you are going to work soon or are from a family business. Very clearly, the financial environment with COVID in the last 8-9 months has completely, turned topsy-turvy and upside down. Deep work would involve actually taking a stock of the financials that you have, taking a look at your financial planning, your goals, recasting it, going through the whole rigor of that. Shallow work would be to check the bank balance. So if you're working, hope that I'll get a raise. If you're not working, hope you'll find a job. Prepare your CV, apply to 5-6 different places. That is easy to do. Mastering a programming language, mastering a new language, learning a completely new language, or mastering a framework like, let's say, Ruby on Rails, or mastering the ERP's deployment, or studying how a ERP is deployed, what is the coding that has to go into it, what business processes have to change. That is deep work. It requires deep study of several different textbooks. Writing a blog, going onto Facebook, updating your status, going in Instagram, taking a picture, going to LinkedIn, writing a short note in LinkedIn about what you thought about this session that you went through. That is shallow work. Similarly, any hobby that you have to pursue, which is a sustained hobby. So if you're learning how to play an instrument, if you're learning how to master a new skill, if you're learning how to swim competitively, if you're learning how to run at a marathon, which requires a competitive mindset, that is deep work, because your schedule changes around it. Your work plan changes around it. If, on the other hand, the way you choose to spend your free time, hobbies and all of that is browsing social networks and all of that, that is shallow work. The last example is even in terms of how you acquire knowledge. If your knowledge acquisition is got some depth in it. I mean, recently I was talking to a friend of mine who bought the 12-set edition of the Mahabharata, which is the translation by Bibek Debroy. I mean, just looking at it in terms of size, it's daunting. And if you seriously mean to work on it, and it's not just going to sit on your bookshelf, then you really need to plan. Each book is more than about 300-400 pages, and it covers, as you can imagine, the entire era, and it requires a deep foundational. You have to study it sequentially, because you can't pick up volume 5 from where, or volume 4 from where the Mahabharata, actually the Mahabharata as we know it starts. The texts start way before. It requires a lot of deep work. On the other hand, if we learn from WhatsApp, from InShot, from blogs, from Reddit, BuzzFeed, all of these. I mean, some of the articles of BuzzFeed, I'm sure many of you would have gone there. I've gone there myself several times. 35 photographs that make celebrities look silly, or 28 things that dogs can do, or 10 things that you would have never. This is the kind of knowledge which is present over there. Time taken for the latter is much easier, much more entertaining. Remember, our primal brain is tuned to look for stimuli. It's not tuned to look at the same spot for a long period of time with intensity. So it constantly gets distracted with 10 things you did not know about so-and-so celebrity. This is the difference between deep and shallow work, to just understand what we mean by deep and shallow work. What are the implications though? And now the comparison is the other way around. Shallow work is fairly easy to do because it's basically mediocre work, and anything that is mediocre is fairly easy to automate. Anything that can be broken down into simple steps is fairly easy not only to automate but also to replicate. Whereas deep work, the kind of work that J.K. Rowling does, the kind of work that any one of the people who have to do a deep, intensive, creative process, it's very, very hard to replicate. You can copy the storyline of J.K. Rowling's, you can copy the theme. There were tons of copycat novelists who came out with stories about magic world and magic books and all of that. None of them were even half as successful as J.K. Rowling's because they did not have that depth or that deep work that went into imagining that entire world and creating a whole vocabulary for that kind of world to be even depicted. The shallow work is usually the path of least resistance. If you have to do something and you have to look busy, then it is very easy to attend meetings, respond to emails. I'll talk about it in a little while. Whereas deep work requires, let's take that example which I gave about reading the Mahabharata, or learning a new programming language, completely new programming framework. It requires you to get down to the syntax. It requires you to understand the structure. If it is radically different from what you have learned earlier, then you have to unlearn many things and understand many concepts, work for hours to basically get the foundation. It requires rigor, discipline, and even effort, which is way, way beyond what you would have. It requires a stretch. In shallow work mindset, we pretty much schedule our life around the meeting. So Monday to this thing, and I know in a student's life, you pretty much have a timetable that is laid out for you, and that's understandable. But even when you go to workspaces, you will find several people who work. They schedule their entire life around meetings. So they say, this, my Monday is occupied by reviews, my Tuesday will be this thing, my Thursday will be that. And they look for slots in between where they will put other things that they truly care about. Whereas in deep way of thinking, in deep way of working, you actually design the schedules to meet your goals. If your goal is gone too late last night, you will not go to a party where you're likely to have a drink and therefore find it difficult. So your deep work, in deep work, your goals design your schedules. In shallow work, the schedules that have been given to you by usually others decides where you end up. That decides your goal for you. We'll talk about this aspect about busyness and productivity in a slide little later, but to very simply explain, I want to clear a myth, and I deliberately want to say this to young leaders here, because your generation, and to a certain extent, I would say the generation maybe even before this, is being brought up in a hogwash. And that hogwash is because you have been given access to a lot of technology. By the way, this is not just your generation. All offices, all of us are, sort of party to this. We have been exposed to technology, and we forget that being exposed to technology at the user end, where Apple is so intuitive, it is designed for intuitiveness. It's designed for simplicity. A tablet is designed for simplicity. Facebook is designed for ease of use. Twitter is designed for ease of use. We should not start thinking we have become tech savvy. Using a product that has been designed to be used by a novice who doesn't understand technology does not qualify us to be tech savvy. Our ability to understand how to build it makes us tech savvy. So the next time you think you are tech savvy in a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being lowest and 10 being highest, please remember that using Facebook, creating your own profile in Facebook is 1 or 2. Actually being able to build or understand how a distributed scalable system in multiple languages in multiple platforms needs to work in real time with thousands of servers and constantly updated data sets and Hadoops and Hulus, if you understand that, then you understand technology. So next time you think you're tech savvy, please don't think that just because we are able to use technology tools and we know how to do this WhatsApp blue tick and not blue tick, it makes us tech wizards. That is very, very shallow thinking. It is not deep thinking. Please remember, it takes a lot of effort to be able to understand the knowledge which it takes to build a platform like Facebook. It takes only a fraction of that knowledge by design to be able to design your own Facebook page. So you should not confuse one for the other. Why deep work is become very, very crucial, especially the post-pandemic world. And actually, I often say this, and I believe it, that this pandemic only hastened, or rather compressed, changes that were going to happen in any case in a decade's time. In any case, in a decade's time, mediocre jobs that were repeatable were going away. We already see Tesla putting out driverless cars, and that's a great example of a easy to replicate job. If you just take the algorithms which a driver gains, not just one driver, hundreds of drivers, over thousands of man years of experience can be gleaned, put into algorithms, fed into machines, into robots, and the robots will then, with sophisticated sensors, take the decisions which will take 98% of the work of driving away from the driver. Very similar to what is happening in airlines, where the skill of the pilots is more and more getting automated, and that's why you see the pilotless planes which are just around the horizon. Matter of fact, for cargo, the drones are already doing the job. So very clearly, any low skill or any skill that can be learned quickly, shallowly, will be very quickly replicated. And even in that pool, the ones that are higher skilled will be very, very widely distributed. What does that mean? Today, if I need somebody to design a very critical framework for my website or for my ERP, I can hire the world's best person and hire staff on demand. So if a person is even better than you even by 10%, I can hire that 10% sitting anywhere in the world. It is not a physical co-location anymore. So you may have been the king of Pune, but let's say there is somebody who's slightly better than you in Nasik, then that market is equally accessible to that person as it is accessible to you, because geography does not matter in the knowledge work. And especially with the catalyst of much of the work going online, geography does not matter at all. So your next competition could be coming from a small country like Sri Lanka, where a bunch of people have done some brilliant deep work and designed a framework which changes online education forever. A great example is Zoom. The Zoom, a company which we had not known the name of, was agile enough to take the advantage of this opportunity and pole vault over all the traditional players, and therefore able to access the entire market. In good old brick and mortar days, let's say you are an amazing baker. You were head and shoulders above the baker who was next in the next town. You still will not be able to access that market because geography kept you away. But in the post-pandemic world, where locomotion has become universal, a small mom and dad outfit today has access to the world's markets. Suddenly, low mediocre skills will have no barriers of entry because the barriers of geographical entry have been removed. Similarly, if someone is highly skilled or even slightly more skilled, that person's ability to access the same market as you is universal. So you will get competed out if you do not do deep work. The second skill I think all leaders will require in the future, very simply because the world is changing so rapidly that you have no idea what skills you will need to learn 3 years from now. So the only one skill that will keep you in good stead is the ability to learn new complicated things rapidly. So if you have the ability to learn something which is very complicated and takes a lot of time for an average person to learn, you are able to learn it in say 100 hours, in 200 hours. You're able to know enough about it in 90 to 95% about it. You may not know 100%, but 90 to 95% about it in a much shorter time. your sense of agility, your ability to respond to changing situations will be far better than your competitor. And the only way that the future is going to reward workers will be the workers who can produce at a very high level, at an elite level, whatever work you may be in. You may get into consulting, you may get into creativity, but only a worker who can produce consistently good work at a high quality and a high speed will have a relevance of the future. Unfortunately or unfortunately for you, depending on which side of the fence you look at it, this is a rare skill. I say fortunately because it's a learnable skill. It's a skill that you can actually learn. If you put your mind to it and say that I want to learn the ability to work deeply, you can learn that. It's a matter of practice. It's a matter of rigor. Unfortunately, if you don't learn it, regardless of whether you care about it or not, the marketplace is going to make you irrelevant very quickly. Now, the question that must be in everyone's mind is, if deep work is so crucial, then why do companies not focus on it? Why are we having open offices? Why is a person who responds to every email, who keeps 5 windows open in his screen, who's working on a midterm project and answering a phone call while listening to music and watching the favorite series, why is that character lauded as a role model? There is a reason for that. And the reason for that, we have to go back to the 1900s. So in 1900, early 1900, 1911, this gentleman, Frederick Taylor, who was a mechanical engineer by profession, he radicalized the way people looked at production and efficiency. He was considered to be the forefather of the assembly line system. Now, the assembly line system, as you know, is it's now a system that is taken for granted. But when he began the assembly line mechanism, you have to understand it was the early stages of the Industrial Revolution. Until then, people make almost the entire product themselves. So if a blacksmith made a wheel, he made the whole wheel himself. He worked on it from beginning till the end. Maybe he used 1 or 2, helpers. But it was 1 unit of work being done by 1 person or 1 unit of people, and therefore there was inconsistency, it was slow, it was laborious. Frederick Taylor demonstrated the power of the assembly line by asking 3 people to make a pin, a simple pin. Now, making a pin is a very simple 3-step process. You have to cut a length of the wire, you have to sharpen one end and hammer the other end, and you have a pin that is ready. He gave a ball of wire and cutters to all the 3 people and asked them to produce as many pins as they could. And within a few weeks, they were able to produce a few 100 pins a day. Then Frederick Taylor did something which is very familiar to us now, but at that time it was a revolution. He told 1 person to cut the pin, the second one to sharpen, and the third one to hammer the head. And now suddenly you had thousands of pins being produced every day because every person was specializing in their job. So when you took a value chain and broke it up into parts, and largely in the Industrial Revolution, that is what happened, you could actually create units of production that were easy to measure. It was so much so that Frederick Taylor was legendary for standing in an assembly line with a stopwatch to measure the amount of production that was happening. The challenge, however, began when the knowledge age came, and this is Thomas Edison, who, as you are aware, was one of the most prolific inventors who ever lived. Now, Thomas Edison's style of working could not be sped up because it was knowledge work. And as he once famously remarked, his entire successes were based on the experiments that failed. Now, the experiments that failed provided the foundation to him to go to the next level. It's a bit like how you learn how to walk. You can, as a child, and of course you will not remember that, but when you look at maybe a younger sibling or you look at a child walking, learning how to walk, you'll realize that the child does it through a series of jerky motions, which are very, very clumsy in the beginning and keep failing. You grab something, then you fall down, then you again grab, then you're trying to balance the weight forward, behind, and soon that brain, neurons, limb connection, myelin, these circuits start working, they become a circuit, and that circuit then becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. And then one day, you not only walk, you run and clear a mile in under 4 minutes. Now, this process requires a series of foundational steps that cannot be sped fast, that cannot be taught from one individual to the other individual in a lift and shift mode. It cannot be made into algorithms and be taught. And that is more critical in today's knowledge environments, because in a knowledge environment, it is very, very difficult to attribute contribution. So let's say there is a big meeting happening, and in that meeting, one individual who doesn't speak most of the time, doesn't do anything, it just gives one idea and one thought. And that one thought transforms the way the organization looks at it. How do you measure do you measure it in time? Do you measure it in hours? Do you measure it in the number of ideas produced per day, number of copies written per day? So because there is really no good scientific method in most organizations to measure the productivity of deep work, very often organizations, including educational institutions, default to the way unit of measurement was measured, where unit of production was measured in the industrial age. Now, that's the reason why a worker who responds to mail instantly, who is always available, who will reply, the first person to reply to an email, the first person to respond with a like or whatever, is considered to be busy, is considered to be doing stuff, because since there is no other measure, busyness becomes the measure of productivity. But I want you to think about productivity in a different way, and I want you to take a look at these three pictures, and I'll walk you through these three pictures one by one. In the left hand side, you see a woman painting a scenery, and as you can see, she's actually painting the scenery right in front of her. It's a watercolor kind of a painting. It requires a certain kind of a brush stroke. When she holds the brush with her right hand and the palette with the left, she has to constantly look at the color. Her mind has to make the color comparisons, change that in the palette, mix just the right amount of water, use just the right stroke and with the right consistency with which to enact the entire canvas, fill it piece by piece, then give it a shade, then give it depth, and then give it another layer, and finally the finishing touches. If you look at the person in the middle, it's a form of Kathakali. And just putting on this makeup takes about 4 or 5 hours just to put on the makeup. And to attain that level of sort of proficiency in the art form, you have to begin interning as a child and literally work for hours every day, and then practice in smaller places, and then smaller places, put in many, many hours of rigor before you are allowed to do a performance even at a local temple or at a local state. It requires deep, deliberate focus. You look at the person on the right who's building this sand model, and he's building this sand castle in the sand. And as you can see, one hand is resting on it. He can't put too much of pressure. If he puts too much of pressure, he'll break that. He has to maintain that very gentle pressure to steady himself. He's got this knife in his right hand with which he's drawing these lines, which are absolutely symmetrical. If you look at the shapes of the bricks, you will see that each one of these tasks, there is no checking of email, there is no checking of WhatsApp messages, there is no multitasking, there is no what's happening there, what's happening here, not listening to, watching. There is single-minded attention to the task at hand. Any work of creativity, which is supposed to be good, which is supposed to be exceptional, supposed to be differentiated, requires this kind of a focus. This, by the way, Instagram. Oh, by the way, one more like, oh, this person has unfollowed you. In that mind frame, do you think this individual would be able to do this work? What makes you think? What makes us think that knowledge workers are any different, and knowledge workers can do multitasking? So this is a knowledge workers workspace continued, because it is not just in the laptop, it is also on the phone now. It has now come to a point where this workspace is almost like that. Those of you who've seen the movie Matrix, if you remember the movie Matrix, it's almost plugged into your head. And there are now enough statistics to show that people actually have started getting a phobia of losing their mobile phones. So that's the dependence on, and it's not information. You see these apps here, you see this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I'm pretty sure most of us have at least 5 of these apps on our phone. And if all these 5 apps were never ever invented, they're not dramatically going to change our quality of life in terms of happiness or in terms of longevity, or actually they'll probably benefit it. And yet, like rats inside a cage who will keep responding to a stimuli, we have now trained our brains to be responding to every stimuli. Now, some of us may argue, oh, that's all okay, but in the modern world, we have to do multitasking, and I can do multitasking. I can focus on all the tasks, equally. That is a myth, and it has been busted several times. And if you want to take part in an experiment, you can try this. Of course, you will now know the spoiler, but you can do it on others. You can do it on other batch students. This is a very, very live and a very, very powerful experiment to illustrate how not only does your mind not change its attention when you do multitask, it keeps carrying back whatever you have done a few minutes ago into your new thought, but it also constantly degrades your performance. This is the story. A bunch of students are given a list of anagrams. There are two-part test. The first part test is their ability to solve a problem when all the components of the solution have been given to them. Let me explain that to you. Two parts to this test. First part, when you are given a problem for which all answers are there, then how do you solve it? And then the second part of the test is when all the answers variables are not there, how will you solve it? So the first part of the test is very simple. It's a set of anagrams. Anagrams, as you know, are words that are jumbled so that their order is changed. So you have to look at the anagram and you have to work out what is the word. And there could be several possibilities, but these were complicated anagrams. It would take a little bit of effort to solve them. And after these anagrams were solved, they were given the second test where they were given a bag of marbles, kancha, as you can see here. And then they were told that you have to estimate how many marbles are inside this bag. They were not allowed to touch it. They could see the bag, but they could not touch it. So here you have to estimate based on the marble. You're given one marble as a size reference, and you can make the size reference of the bag, and then you can do whatever formula you want. And you have to estimate how many marbles are in the bag. Now, surprisingly, when this test was administered, it was found, and it is found consistently, half the group overestimates the number of balls and half the group underestimates the number of balls. Now, this might be puzzling to you. Why would half, exactly half, overestimate the number? Maybe there are 100 marbles in the bag, and half will say there were 400 marbles and half will say there were only 50 marbles. Why does that happen? Why it happens is part one of the test. And part one of the test, the students have been given two different sets of words to unjumble. On the left-hand side, you see words that depict largeness of size: juggernaut, light year, elephant, massive, big, supernova, universe, Milky Way, galaxy. On the right-hand side, the words that are depicted are tiny, small, amoeba, bacteria, virus, pinpoint, ant. The act of unjumbling those words rewires your brain into thinking big or thinking small for the next problem. That is the amount of residue we carry from the previous task. So if you check your email and there is a disturbing message there, whatever disturbing could be, that deadline that you were supposed to give for a university application has been preponed by 4 days. It is disturbing. Or there is something concerning in your medical report, please see us day after tomorrow. It is disturbing. No matter how much you switch from that task, the attention residue has already eroded a certain part of your focus and taken it away from you. So those of you who still believe that you can be effective multitasking, I only have this to offer, that you will be 100 times more effective if you did not do multitasking and you realize the importance of deep work. Everything else that you are telling yourself is just kidding yourself. And I've been through that journey myself, so I know exactly how one can kid oneself to look very, very busy, but not be very productive. Unfortunately, and again, ironically, modern workspaces are only exacerbating the problem because they are creating this open workspaces. And of course, the open workspaces are being created for several reasons. First reason is, of course, it is much cheaper to have open workspaces and supervision is much more possible. And secondly, increasingly employers are trying to reduce all the work into simple, repeatable tasks so that the qualifications and the competence required to do those tasks is made lower and lower and lower, so that the resource becomes cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. Fortunately, for those of you who realize this, will also realize that therefore people who are capable of doing deep work are becoming rarer and rarer and rarer. And that is why if you learn that skill, you will become a very rare commodity. So here are 7 steps that I've kind of, sort of worked together. Some of these are from my experience. Some of them are obviously from various different studies and experiments that have been carried out. Some has been from looking back at my own life and my own career and looking at various different functions which were done. Some deep work which was done under different conditions, some deep work which could not be done because the conditions changed. There are 7 distinct steps that need to be done, both from an organization point of view and from an individual point of view. I realize that for this audience, individual aspects will probably make more sense. So that's where I'm going to focus. First is for you to understand that this is a very important and a big task. It is not an easy task. It doesn't mean after looking at this present, I should focus. So you know what? I will switch off my phone. I'll keep my phone away while I'm writing my paper. It doesn't work like that. If you keep your phone away, a part of your mind is already thinking, oh, my phone is away. Oh, I need to check a message. Or let me check. So you're already distracted. You have to realize that our brain has over the last many, many years been programmed to fleet from one thought to the other thought. That is why for many of your generation, you might find it stupid. And why? You may think, why? Multiplication tables up to 16 were the norm. When we were studying, we had to remember multiplication tables up to 16. You might say, but there's a calculator now. Why do you need that? You're right. You don't need that. You don't need to remember phone numbers. Good old days when there were rotary phones, every individual remembered at least 8 to 10 phones. Check with your parents. They would still remember maybe their house landline number or whatever. Now you don't need to remember the numbers. That's all very good. But also what is happening is the capability to remember numbers is also going away. Your brain is also losing the capability to focus on something for a long period of time because your brain has constantly been trained to fleet from one thought to the next, to the next, to the next stimulus. So please don't think that this is as simple as deciding, okay, from tomorrow I'll do deep work. And while I'm doing deep work, I'll remove all other distractions for half an hour or 1 hour. And then after that, I will do the, it's not going to work like that. You will already be distracted. You have to set up spaces. I mean, you don't necessarily need to build in that Bollinger Tower or, set up your own room. And if you don't, but you have to set up your own space. That own space could be just a headphone, which is cutting out all the noise, not music, but a headphone, which is cutting out all the noise. It could be facing a wall, so you have solitude. It could be agreeing with your roommate that, please, you will not disturb me for these 5 hours. It could be getting off your email and your phone for a prescribed period of time every day to build it as a ritual. It's only when you build it as a ritual. It's a bit like building any muscle, including your bodybuilding muscle. So if I gave you a big lecture on how to build your biceps, you say, oh, yeah, very good, very good. I'll go to the gym and do 5 minutes or 10 minutes of that. And don't do it the next day or the day after that or the day after that. And then meet me after 1 month. They said, it doesn't work, your idea, it doesn't work. Why? So I went to gym once, it doesn't work. Not going to work. So you have to understand that this is a sustained practice, but like anything that is worthwhile, it will require sustained practice. But like anything worthwhile, once you've acquired that skill, it will change your life literally forever. Second thing, you have to know that willpower is a finite resource. It is not infinite. Willpower is not a reflection of your character. It's not a reflection of your values. Willpower is quite simply the muscle which is strong at some times, and as the willpower is exercised over a period of time, it becomes weaker and weaker and weaker, which is why you need rituals to guide, which is why even if you look at our own mythology and our history, there were rituals through the day. You had the day divided into hours, and there were certain hours when you were supposed to do worship, certain hours when you were supposed to do work, certain hours, because that ritual would force you and everybody else to work like a timetable. That's one of the reasons why there is a lot of efficiency in organizations like the armed forces and all of that, because it's a very regimented, every hour is accounted for and every hour is a ritual. And that ritual is what enables you to focus single-mindedly on that task for that prescribed duration. So we have to remember this is not an easy thing to do. We have to set up a complete programmed to do this. If you're just like any developmental program, if you want to develop your physical fitness, you have to do you want to run a marathon, you have to do a full program. You can't say, I'll just practice sometimes when I feel like it. The book Talent Code, written by Daniel Cole, who's a best-selling author. He's written another book called Culture Code. I would strongly recommend you reading both of these books. He set out to solve a very interesting problem. He set out to solve why is it that certain places in certain times of history produce an inordinate amount of talented people. So he tracks down one gym in Russia which has produced more tennis players than the entire United States as a country. He tracks down why is it that a small island republic like Dominican Republic, which entered into baseball in the US in the late 40s, suddenly dominates that sports way, way, way beyond the number of people who are supposed to be there in that island. How did South Korea field her first woman golfer in 1998 and by now has 1/3 of the PGA trophies to their name? What is it that makes talent come out in certain talent nodes? And there are certain sort of theories which he gives with proof as to why it works. But one of the key aspects he talks about there, which is extremely important for us, is the actual mechanics of the brain. He says that when you are doing a task, which is a high, deep, craftsmanship-like task, whether it's compiling beautiful code, whether it's creating something in a lathe machine, whether it's creating a concept note which is very crystal clear and succinct, whether it's writing an article which captures the magnitude of the problem in 800 words, this function that you do is creating a neuron circuit in your brain, which if you keep doing again and again and again, gets a coating of a fatty tissue around it called myelin. Now, myelin is a pigment which is only generated when you do the same task again and again in deliberate practice. If you're focusing on it and deliberating on it and doing it, then the neurons and the circuits create myelin. And that is what enables you to change the gears of your scooter now without thinking, change the gear of your car and operate the clutch. First time you did it, you had to really think it through. You were jerking the car up and down, you were losing. And as you learned walking, you learned driving, myelin became the circuit and it became a fiber optic cable. So data could move really, really fast. Now, the thing about myelin is, while you are doing that task, if you're distracted by anything else, then those formation of the circuitry does not work, because then the brain does not know which circuit to coat with myelin. And that is why, if you remember, when you were learning how to drive, your entire attention was on the driving. You were so fixed by the driving that even the vehicles, you were looking at why? Because you needed that amount of focus for the myelin to get coated. Now, if you're trying to focus on a task and constantly some window is popping up, or you're checking your mail, or you're looking at something else, your brain does not know which circuits to coat with myelin. And therefore, the myelin just floats around the brain and no circuit becomes an expert level circuit. That's the importance neurologically of the reason why we should do one task with a deliberate practice if we are trying to learn the way. It could be intellectual, it could be physical, it could be talent, it could be playing an instrument, it could be anything. There also needs to be different. Of course, you have to have a combination of deep versus shallow. You can't say, I'll do only deep work. So I'm going to take, if you don't answer your email for 3 days, you'll get fired. So you need to have a combination between deep and shallow. You also need to have a realization that there is certain times of the day or certain occasions where you need or you perform better with deep work. And there are certain other times where shallowness is okay. I want to give you 2 examples from my own life. So I write some amount of work. I write articles for newspapers. I've written a book. I write on my blog. Now, what you're seeing over here are 3 different topics which I wrote about from the beginning of this lockdown. And as you can, I go from right to left. You can see April 17th, I wrote this book. Wrote this article about the 7 rules of communication during a crisis, because that was the time of the pandemic crisis. Then I wrote another piece which was preparing to be laid off, because that's likely to happen. Bad news for students who are hoping to get a job, but now layoffs are happening. And then on June 23rd, I wrote a piece which was carried as an analysis in the op-ed of Hindustan Times, which was, how is China looking at what is happening in the LAC. It was it's an analysis piece. Now, the first two are driven by response to stimuli of the environment, but they are on my blog, and they are largely containing information from my personal experience, books that I've read, things that I've experienced, and they are on a blog where I have the ability to change it. If I want, if I made a mistake or something, I can change it. The stakes are not that big. It's one more article in a series of articles that I've written. Yes, it'll be very useful to some people, but unlikely to cause a controversy or something of that nature. The article that is going as an op-ed analysis is not just going to be read by thousands of people in India. It will also be read by military analysts, because it's been written by a former military officer and somebody who was in that grade. It will also perhaps be read by our adversaries. It will be read by several different people. It is in print, so it will be there for posterity. And here I have to understand the subject matter in much, much greater depth. I have to verify, I have to cross-verify, I have to check whether my facts are true from 2 or 3 independent sources, and then create this piece of work. Both are 800 words. All the pieces are 800 words. But the strategy for this kind of deep work, vis-a-vis checking my LinkedIn, which is important to me also, because LinkedIn is also the way through which many people reach out to me. I think your college reached out to me through LinkedIn or through one of my social media handles, through the Twitter handle or whatever. This is also important, but it is not deep work, it's shallow work. So I need to have different strategies for them. I need to focus and say, okay, deep work, this article is due on so-and-so date. I have to start preparing it for so-and-so number of weeks. I need to read about it. I need to perhaps do a draft of it. This very presentation that I'm doing for you, if I have to create this, I have to read several different books. I have to correlate it with examples in my life. I have to correlate it with examples that will resonate with you, and I have to create a prototype of it. I have to test the prototype with somebody. It involves deep work, and I know I require a certain amount of time for this, and a certain day or a certain time in the day when I might be better doing it. Shallow work is something which I can do maybe when I'm traveling, when I can be distracted, because each tweet is a separate tweet. Each LinkedIn message is a separate message. It can be dealt with and finished off there and then. We need different strategies for different kind of work. Which leads me to the point, we also need to plan our schedule in a fair amount of detail. Now, I know that for students, this is already done by the faculty to a certain extent. The year is divided, the assignments are divided, the submissions are divided, but even then you have a lot of free time with you. And how you schedule that free time, how you schedule every minute. I'm not saying you should get anal about it, but you need to know how your 24 hours are going and not be in an illusion. There are several tests which have been carried out. You can carry out a test on yourself. You can try this out. I'm sure in your campus you have IT systems which can give you the data. You can do a questionnaire and say, how much time do you spend online, and try and answer that question. I can assure you, your estimate will be half of what you really spend online. You spend far more time in distract. All of us, by the way, all of us, not just you, me also. We spend a lot more time distracted than we think we do. We think we work 8-hour days. We actually don't. We work barely about 3 to 4 hour days. The rest of the time is distractions, doing stuff that is really not necessary or not adding that much of value add. So please plan your schedule in detail. Basically, it says that please husband the most important resource that you have with great deal of care, and the most important resource you have, which is universally true for everybody, whether you're a Mukesh Ambani or a student, is the 24 hours in a day. So please plan your schedule just for the, not just for the day, but the week, the month, the year, the horizon. Also, adopt a very strict rule as a knowledge worker about the tools that you will select. Let me make this a simpler way to understand. So I ride a motorcycle. I ride it very often. Very often I ride it solo. Solo means I'm riding by myself. And sometimes you can be in a desolate place and you can be, you can have a puncture or you can have some problem with your bike. So obviously you need to carry tools with you. But if your toolkit becomes heavy, the bike becomes more clunky. If the bike becomes clunky, you are more likely to have accidents, you're more likely to get injured, you're more likely to be fatigued and tired. You're actually more likely to need the tools in the first place if you carry too many tools. So you have to take every tool and judiciously ask, is it giving me some benefit or enough benefit? Is it giving me enough benefit for me to install this on my phone? Every app that you add does give you additional benefit, no doubt about it. It gives you one more additional. Instagram gives you one more benefit of tracking your friends by photos. Swiggy gives you one more benefit. The Zomato gives you one more benefit other than Swiggy, whatever. But for each installation of a tool on your knowledge workspace, it is also demanding some effort, some distraction, some time taken away from you. So please get away from that how many tools can I download approach to a craftsman. A craftsman takes only 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 tools because he knows that every additional tool also comes with its cost. Try it for a week or 10 days. Remove all your social media interactions or reduce them. And suddenly you will find oodles of time freeing up. And that's a very good reminder to know that perhaps you are actively sabotaging your ability to do deep work by grabbing as many tools. I've actually seen people with laptops who have got 4 or 5 different programming languages loaded on it, 6 different browsers, 2 different, I mean, you know what I'm saying. So I think you have to understand that unlike the physical tool, where if you go to a carpenter and you ask him, why don't you buy 3 more saws? He said, why the hell should I buy 3 more saws? What benefit will I get with it? Unlike that, in the knowledge environment, it's very easy to download 3 more tools, and therefore we download it and we don't look at the fact that every tool comes with its own distraction, which takes away time from us. To develop deep work brain, we need to do things that require us to have deep focus. This potter who is going through a very intricate part of the pottery right now, shaping the mud which is wet, if even the phone rings in the pocket, that shape will go. That person has to have absolute focus on that task. We need to train our brain to have that absolute focus. And the way to train that brain for that absolute focus is to actually work at stillness. Let me give you an example. Next time you're standing in a line and you have nothing to do for 2 minutes, avoid that temptation of picking out the phone and checking something. You know why? Because what is happening is your brain cannot tolerate stillness. So the moment it becomes still, it looks for a stimuli. Moment it gets a stimuli, it gets a response. And this becomes now a repeated habit, and your myelin now encodes around it. So what myelin tells the new secretary is every time you're distracted, every time you're bored, every time you're required, every time you don't have any stimuli, look for a distraction, and guess what? The distraction will liberate you. It will give you that 1 second boost. It will give you that 1 second of kick of adrenaline or whatever. You need to train your brain to be still. That is why, interestingly, all our ancestors and in our mythology, there is so much of emphasis on meditation and focus and the ability to sit still and dhyanam. All of that is coming from the same central element, that you train your brain to do some amazing scripture work, to train your brain to join the dots, to look at these stars and figure out that these are planets and these are stars and this is their orbit, to train your brain to be able to compose poetry, which is running into thousands of pages, to imagine an epic like a Raman. You have to train to sit still, to develop the muscles which will enable you to focus on one task and not be distracted. And that is a very, very important ritual in developing the muscle to do deep work. It's almost like if you were to ask me, what are the exercises I need to do running? Most most runners, not even experts, will advise you that the best exercise you can do for running is your core. It's not necessarily your leg muscles, it's your core muscles, because your core stabilizes the body. Similarly, the best tool for improving your ability to do deep work is the ability to do nothing, the ability to sit in stillness, the ability to sit in boredom. That is what will enable your brain to not seek the distraction and not be seduced by the that happens somewhere, to not be seduced by that. Lastly, I think this is a very important aspect to remember. If you go back to that slide where you have that artist who is painting that picture, or my favorite one is that person who's building that sand castle. And I'll tell you why I find that my favorite one. Any guesses? Anyone wants to guess? Because that man is perfecting his craft. He knows that this sand thing is not going to last even an hour. Even if he leaves it there and goes away, someone will come and kick it and someone will break it, or water will come. It's not a painting that will hang forever. It is not a, it's going to be very transitionary, but the person is perfecting his craft. He's not building something, he's perfecting his craft. He's enjoying that process of improving it 1 degree further and 1 degree further and 1 degree further. You know, many years ago when I was a small boy, I'd gone to Kerala and I actually went to a blacksmith. You know, I didn't even know what a blacksmith is. Went to a blacksmith. I was very fond of knives as a kid. And he made a knife for me. He made a knife for me, a kind of a bayonet knife for me, which for a young kid was a big deal. And he made it in front of me. And the way he made it is he took firstly a piece of metal. By the way, it's a fascinating coincidence that a very similar anecdote is described in the Deep Work, the book. But he describes the narrative of a very accomplished metal forger. I'm telling you the story of my village blacksmith, who my grandfather told him make a knife for him. He's very fond of knives, and he said, "Come, come." And I went with him to see how it's made. So he takes a piece of metal, and first he tells me that this piece of metal, it is from the spring suspension of trucks, and this steel is the best steel to make a knife. And then he puts it in the forge, and he makes that. You know, he turns that thing to make that fire burn and to turn the metal red hot. Then he tells me also, you also press it. So I'm actually pressing that forge, and that air which is coming out has my contribution in it, you know. And then he takes this hammer and he hammers each one, tak, tak. He first makes it into a long scale-like thing. And then with the scale, he makes it, shapes it again, puts it in water, again shapes it, puts it in water, again shapes it, tak, tak. And he makes that amazing piece of metal. Then he takes a buffalo's horns on both sides. He puts rivets through them and makes the handle. And then he uses a file and he shapes the handle so that I can grip it. He touches my hand and say, okay, hold my hand. And then he again, and hold my hand again. And then he makes it customized to my handle. This piece of work, it's not a very important thing. It's not significant. He's not going to change the world. He's not discovered some new platform like Twitter. He's not discovered the new vaccine to corona or something like that. He's just made a knife for which he must have been paid 10 rupees or whatever, you know, in those days. But he found a significant way to approach what was considered to be a mundane task. He found a very significant way to approach. He thought that he would educate this 10-year-old child on how it is made, why this metal is taken, why do we use the cow's or buffalo's horns, why is it riveted and not screwed? If you screw it, the screw can fall off, or sometimes it can hurt you. Rivet goes absolutely flush with it. If it is a double-edged blade, then it needs to have a cover, because if you keep it somewhere, it can cut. Going into a significant approach towards your task will make that task enriching. If you keep looking for significant tasks to do before you do deep work, then you will have to wait for a long time, because it's very rare that significant tasks will be given to people who do not know how to do deep work. So in conclusion, I want to share with you that all of us are becoming shallow and shallower and shallower workers. All of us are finding it difficult to multiply numbers. All of us are finding it difficult to concentrate on reading. By the way, this is not just a phenomenon that you and I are experiencing. The entire industry is experiencing that. That's why books which are 900 pages, 800 pages, they are not even published anymore. All books are 200 pages. The volumes are slimmer, synopsize, summarize, abstract, summary, book summary. Book summary will never ever give you the depth of that subject. It will tell you the bullet points with which you can answer the exam question, because the exam question itself is a wrong tool to measure depth. It is only measuring shallow recall of knowledge. But if you train your brain to do deep work, you will be doing significant work. And significant work in a world where most workers are shallow workers is going to be an extremely rare commodity. And I think somewhere in your B school economics, you must have been taught that if a commodity is rare, its value in the market goes up substantially. So with that, I would make these suggested readings for you. These are some of the books that I read and referred to. There are a whole series of publications and articles written by scientists, which are also quoted. Some of them are quoted in this book. And if you're more keen to getting into this subject, I'll be happy to try and answer some of your questions. I don't know how we are placed for time, but if you have some questions, I can try and answer them. If you have questions I can't answer, please follow me on Twitter. You can tweet to me your question if you think it will benefit everyone. If you think it's something that you need to discuss with me, then just DM me. Thanks a ton once again. And many of the articles I spoke about are there on my website. You can check them out there as well. Thank you.
Yes, sir. So thank you, sir, for such an impactful and engrossing session. I'm sure the audience is inspired and has realized the immense potential of deep work through this wonderful session. So now we open the floor to questions for our participants. So the first question is from Kunal Nayak. So Kunal, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Sorry, are you reading out the questions or should I?
Okay,
Hello.
so
Thank you so much, sir, for introducing us to such a wonderful concept. This will definitely make me think a lot. My question to you is, sir, are there any other skills that can be kind of paired with deep work that will help us, make the process smoother of learning new things or kind of, adopting new skills?
I think there are many skills that can be paired and unpaired and all of that. But this, to my mind, is the fundamental core skill that is required to acquire any other skill. It's a bit like if somebody were to ask me, can you recommend to me a list of books to read? And suppose one of the list of books to read is how to read fast and how to take notes. When do you think I should advise the person to read it? In the beginning of the list or in the end of the list? Very obviously, I would advise the person to first read the book, how to absorb and how to read rapidly, so that these two foundations will assist that person in reading the remaining 98 books in the list of 100 books. So similarly, if you are able to learn the skill of doing deep work, and as I said, the requirement of this skill, the foundational requirement of this skill is the ability to focus on something for a long period of time without being distracted by stimuli, without saying, okay, let me just check my phone. Or saying, okay, 10 minutes, I'm going to focus on this essay. And after that, I'll just check my phone for 1 second. Doesn't work like that. You have to learn that skill first. Learn the skill of being still, learn the skill of being able to focus, and then other skills can be paired onto it. The moment you pair another skill, you're already getting distracted from the core skill. So don't say I will pair, the ability to focus rapidly and also learn how to play the guitar at the same time. It's not going to work. You have to the story about Arjun and Mahabharat, when he shoots that eye of the fish. And I'm sure you must have heard this story, read it, been told this story by your, grandparents, parents, and all of that. A good question to ask is, what does Arjun say when he is asked, what do you see? Do you remember? Anybody wants to take a shot?
Eye of the fish.
Oh, just give me the exact sentence he says. Somebody, one exact sentence he says.
I can see nothing except the eye of the fish.
That's the right answer. Most people say, I can see only the eye of the fish. That is not the right answer. He doesn't say I can see one. He says, I can see nothing except the eye of the fish. So remember that word I said, nothingness, stillness, boredom, nothingness. He is able to see nothing other than the eye of the fish. So I would strongly recommend that once you've got this skill in hand and you're able to work with deep, intense focus for 2 hours, 3 hours, one whole day, then you might want to start pairing it with other skills which might force multiply.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so the next question is from Vinay. Vinay can go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, so wonderful presentation, sir. I have a specific question like, do we need to allocate a specific time in a day for deep and shallow work?
That's a good question. I was trying to answer it earlier when I was speaking about it. Yes, it definitely, one second, I'll just stop the share so I can see all of you. There are certain periods of time when your energy levels are high, and when your energy levels, your concentration is higher, you actually have just more of mental energy. This is, by the way, not something I'm talking like, smoke and this is actually a scientific and a biological fact. Just like a muscle, your muscle is strong at a certain point of time, and as you go through the day, you're fatigued with that muscle. So if your body is fatigued, your mind is fatigued, not really a good idea to sit down for deep work at that point of time. Now, traditionally, we would have heard that statement, early to bed, early to rise, and this is a statement most of us have grown up with, and therefore we have assumed that when you wake up early morning, your concentration is very high and all of that. But studies have actually proven that that is not necessarily true. There is a fantastic book written by Dr. Matthew, I'm forgetting his last name, Why We Sleep. Please read that book, where it speaks about the fact that human beings have different circadian rhythms, which means there are certain people who are nightingales, that they'll stay awake till late night and they're able to, and some are early birds who are able to work with concentration early. It's what works for you. And what works for you often is not just a function of your circadian rhythm, it's also of your social rhythm. So if you have other commitments, if there are people who are going to be noisy during the day, then early hours of the morning, maybe the ones, you've got kids, you need some quiet time. If you need to go away somewhere physically, these are all elements that make up your customized training program. But the fact is that you need to find that time when you are most optimal in your thinking, in your analysis, in your ability to concentrate, and use that time for deep work and not shallow work. The temptation to do shallow work at that time is very, very strong. I'll tell you why. Moment you reach office, early morning, reach the office, look at the mails, it gives you a sense of accomplishment. Many times when I asked some colleagues also, what did you do? I've cleared my mail in the morning. Clearing your mail may not be the best utilization of deep work time, because clearing mail gives a sense of accomplishment, but it's actually not very meaningful work. Most of it is forward reply, ask for more details. Very rarely will you sit down in the morning and reply a mail thinking construct-wide conceptually. In any case, you can't think construct and concept in Microsoft Outlook. It is not a tool conducive for that. For that, you need white paper, whiteboard, clear thinking space to be able to put your visualization on paper and then pull it down into text. You can't think using PowerPoint. That's with the PowerPoint, you begin with PowerPoints. You can't think. So use the tools and use your time in the way that they are designed to be most productive.
Thank you, sir.
So the next question is from Stanton. Stanton, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Yes. So thank you, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yeah, you are.
Yeah, so thank you, sir, for the session. It was very nice. It was insightful. I think a lot of us struggle with this, especially since we've had this impact of internet on us and flitting between screens, which is what they've all been made for. So my thought process is, you had this concept of mental residue when you're switching. A part of your mind is eroded and it's gone. That, like, so you had that mental residue thing. Is it related to the fact that when some people, they feel like they're trying to remember something, they're trying to come up with something, and when they switch their thought process to something else, they get the answer to the previous problem that they were thinking about? Is that related?
No, I don't think so. What I talked was attention residue. Attention residue, and what you are describing is much more of a thoughtless, when you're in the state of thoughtlessness, an idea comes, or when you're thinking of something else, another idea comes. That is more of your, neurons firing in different directions, and suddenly that thought, because there is no guarantee that it will come. It may come, it may not come. So you can't say when you sit for an exam that I'll go into that thoughtlessness and the answer will come to me. It may not come to you, right? So what I'm talking about is attention residue and attention focus. Attention to something that you do is what your life experience for that day is going to be. Let me give you an example. Let's take an average day that you have gone through. If you choose to focus your attention on the great things that happened that day, you woke up, I don't know whether you're based in Goa. Are you based in Goa?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, but yeah, you're waking up in a holiday place, Goa. You're waking up in a nice place and all of that. You had your morning coffee, which is a very satisfying thing. If you don't get it, you realize its value. You had a day. You focus on the things. You focus your attention on good things. It was a good day for you. But you focus your attention on the bad thing. When you woke up, there was something, light came straight in your face and you woke up like that. And that day, the coffee was slightly lukewarm. You focus your attention on the bad things. It was a bad day for you. That is the power of attention and the power of focus. You can actually change the way you experience your day and therefore, by definition, your life based on what you choose to focus your attention on. So attention is a very, very powerful faculty. It should not be confused with what you were mentioning, that, when I think of something else, then I remember.
So actually, I also wanted to ask, how does subconscious play a role in this? The subconscious, does it factor into deep work?
No, it doesn't. To my understanding, the thing that I'm talking about here is focused attention of the conscious mind, not the subconscious. So, those stunts of listening to a tape while going to sleep and learning the language and all of that, most of them are stunts. They are not really validated by experiments. We have always found that anything new that you're trying to learn, if you give it conscious, focused attention, you're more likely to achieve it than thinking that your subconscious mind, if you keep reiterating. Of course, your subconscious mind can help you with motivation. So if you constantly run affirmation that I'm lucky, I'm smart, I'm good, it'll make you think you are good. No doubt about it. It'll make you think you are happy. But if you go for an interview in which programming language is of a very high level, you can't subconsciously think your way into becoming a Visual C programmer. You can't say I'm a good programmer, and go and try and become a programmer. It will not work. You can try.
Yes, sir. So I just wanted to end with some points. Like you told us that you gave us 7 ways of attaining this state, but like any sort of start to finish, like in a starting position, what do I do? Like right now, if I have passion for something, I can probably focus better. I can attempt to focus better. But if I don't have passion to do something, then how do I get that drive?
So one of the good things, is this recorded? Is this session? I see it's recorded. Yeah.
Yes,
so Stanton, one of the things I'd urge you is to listen to the presentation once again. Start to finish is usually implied when you say 7 steps and you number them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It usually implies that these are the 7 steps you have to do. I spoke about this aspect of passion in the end. In the last point, I said that rather than looking for something to do deep work, that I have to be passionate about it. जब तक मेरे को पैशन नहीं होगा तब तक मेरे से डीप वर्क नहीं होता है. The way to reverse it is that you will never ever get the capability to get deep work unless you have the capability to do anything that you are asked to do, or most of the things that you are asked to do, with some sense of passion, some sense of ownership. ये मेरे को बोला है काम करने के लिए, so this work should be of a very high degree. If I've been asked to write a paper, I must make it a paper which my juniors will refer for the next 10 years. Stanton ने एक paper लिखा था यार marketing में, वो जरूर पढ़ना है exam के लिए. That is how you find passion for your work and significance for your work. But if you're waiting for the day you will be struck by a bolt, one day some film producer will cross you and say, Stanton, you are a great writer, man. Let's start writing. And that day you will find passion. Ain't going to happen. Or may happen, I don't know, but less likely.
Yes, sir. Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yes, so we are happy to get a lot of questions, but due to the constraints of time, so would you like to take one last
I'll
question?
take one last one, and I would recommend, as I said, that a lot of the material that I discussed with you in this presentation, you will get that and much more if you read those 4 books. Please read them. A good test to know whether you're even going down the road of deep work, or is it going to be another presentation you saw and अच्छा था यार, मजा आया, deep work करना चाहिए, कभी करेंगे, अगले साल करेंगे. If you're going that way, then the easiest barometer is you will not read those 4 books. So if you read those 4 books, make notes, take elements of that into your daily life, I think you would be on the path to recognizing the danger of being seduced by the internet of things and how internet is actually making our brains into a mush that cannot focus at all. Last question, please.
Yes, sure. Amaya, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Thanks, Anirudh. Thank you so much, sir. It was really an insightful one. My question is specifically, like we being students, my question is specific to that. Like the importance of deep work is clearly very significant, but given the online methodology where we are standing today, the new normal as they call it, so how would you suggest a student should poise himself or herself to do deep work, where sharing links and documents and taking assistance over the line for studying has become the need of the hour?
I agree. I agree. So my point is very simple. I'm not saying that you don't use these tools. I actually gave an example with 2 pieces of work that I do. If I'm writing an article, then I take the books, I take the material, I take all of that, I shut everything out for the next 6 to 7 hours. I'm reading the backstory of the. So for example, read that article. It's a Hindustan Time article. It's if you just type my name, Raghu Raman, chess and Go and China, you will get it. Now, in that article, I have done a comparison of the game of chess, which is the Indian strategy, and the game of Go, which is the Chinese strategy. It's a fair bit of nuanced article, which says that chess has one center of gravity. And if you break that center of gravity, you win, whereas Go surrounds the enemy, and that's the Chinese strategy. Now, for this, I need to understand the game Go really well. I don't play the game. I've never played the game Go. So I have to actually go and study the game. I have to enroll on an online sort of teaching place, learn the basics of the game, practice that game a little bit to be able to write about it. Now, I cannot at that point of time be waiting for links to come and this and that. At some point, I draw a line and I say enough information is there with me now. Yes, one more additional link can add a little bit of more marginal value. Remember, like one more tool can give me one additional benefit, but is it enough benefit to warrant my distraction? And the gate is closed for any more information coming in. And then it is just deep work in terms of producing the output, not getting distracted once more, not checking one more link, maybe I should check with Wikipedia, not doing that at all. If it means, so by the way, whenever I work, I can show you that if it is here with me, just hang on 1 second. Yeah, so this is a good way to illustrate, this is the way I work, so it might work for you. So before I begin any session, I will actually, I don't know if this is visible, I'll actually take detailed notes and I will create the points I want to speak about in slide forms in these pages, right? Once I've got the first draft of it ready, then I'll begin with the second draft, which is exactly what the slides will contain. Each slide's final point, and then what conclusion I'll come to, and what's the message I want to leave the audience with. This number of pages that I've just unfurled for you, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 pages before I even start making a PowerPoint presentation. Now, this notebook will grow in size, it will grow in experience whenever I'm doing something to do with deep work. Whenever I'm working on this presentation, it will get added with more data, more information, and it will become richer and richer and richer. And let's say 2 years down the line, when I'm talking about deep work, if you hear this presentation, every story would have changed. Everything would be different because I would have been working on this project intensely over a period of time. Shallow work is if you send me a mail saying, can you send me the list of 5 books to read? I'll send you the list of 5 books, and that's the end of the story. I must not confuse these two. That's the crux as a student you need to realize.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks a ton, all of you. I am very happy to have met with you. I'm hoping all of you are in Goa. At least you guys are having a greater time than I am sitting in Bombay. And if I'm ever in Goa, I'd be very happy to, sort of come and look here. Thank you very much.
So for answering all the questions. So on behalf of Goa Institute of Management and Team Ribandar Talks, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude and thank you for spending your valuable time and efforts for disseminating your precious knowledge and experiences with us. We are honored to have you and would love to host you on our beautiful campus as well. I would also like to thank everyone here for participating enthusiastically and being such a great audience. Thank you and have a nice day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Have a great day, sir.
You too.